Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. My name is Russ Martin. I was mayor for 2 terms between 1993 and 1997, and also I was on the council in 1987 through 1989. When I read about this in the newspaper and several different accounts, I felt compelled to talk, compelled to give my opinion, and a lot of this is opinion. In 1962, I will say, the city of Asheville, with the help of the FAA and a city employee, Billy Walcott, bought the airport land with the cooperation also of Henderson County, because we had to have part of the Henderson County to create the airport. In the 1970s, the council established an authority to operate the airport's day-to-day business. The City Council of Asheville gave its blessing and created that authority. In 1988, the City of Asheville gave the collection lines of the city's sewer division to the Metropolitan Sewerage Department, thereby establishing or helping to establish another authority. I was on that council. The council once again gave its blessing and established the framework for an authority to operate. In both these instances, the City Council of Asheville gave its blessing and willingly gave up the day-to-day control of all of those assets. The current situation is a bit different, however. The North Carolina legislature has given itself the right and its own authority to wrest away not only control, but to give the ownership of $1 billion-plus asset that the city bought and paid for in the 1930s and has maintained ever since that time. Having the legislative authority does not make it the right thing to do. If this was eminent domain, which it is not quite, when a piece of property is obtained or taken away, a fair value must be paid by that entity. Now, some people are saying that the customers who pay the monthly charge for water now have an ownership interest. Now, this is only true for the citizens who live in the city of Asheville, since the city owns that asset, and those individuals are residents. Forgive the pun, but that argument doesn't hold water. For example, if you buy a house for rental purposes, take out a mortgage and then rent it, the person who pays you rent does not create an ownership interest in that real estate. It doesn't create an ownership interest if I own a farm and rent a portion of that farm to someone to pasture his or her cattle. Now, I pay Progress Energy a monthly bill for electric. Now, if I created an ownership interest in Progress Energy because I pay them every month, I would like someone to let me know so I collect some dividends. They're a utility, and so is the water system in Asheville. In summation, regardless of whether the state has a self-imposed right to take property or to establish an authority, they either should give fair value for that asset, or they need to permit the city to make those decisions that affect their right to govern themselves, their assets, and their constituents. Thank you for the time to say these words.
Thanks, Nelda. I'd like to thank the League for sponsoring this. I, too, as we talked earlier, miss Hazel. Jeff, I wish Hazel was here as well. I'd like to say good evening to the panel, to the audience. My name's Mike Holcomb. I'll tell you just a little bit about why I'm getting up here to speak. I'm a native of the city of Asheville. I'm a tax-paying resident of the city of Asheville. I also spent 23 years working for the Water Resources Department, the last 4 of which was as the Director of Water Resources. I managed and led the efforts to modernize the regional water system, starting with the Bee Tree Water Plant, known as the William DeVrue Water Plant at Bee Tree Lake, the expansion of the North Fork Water Treatment Facilities at Burnett Reservoir, the East Asheville Booster Pump Station, the installation of the SCADA system, the AM/FM utility mapping system. I also led the efforts to locate an intake in Henderson County at the forks of the Mills River and the French Broad River, and in fact purchased that property that was ratified by the Water Authority. And I did also happen to manage the construction of the Mills River Water Treatment Facility. I also was my privilege to serve as an MSD board member. Hello, Steve. For 3.5 years. Incidentally, masterful job at the history of the situation, as good as I've ever heard. I'm here to say that I'm in favor of a combined publicly owned water and wastewater utility for the Western North Carolina region, substantially similar to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Utility Department, or CMUD, as it is called. From an ecosystem perspective, regional surface waters from area streams and lakes are treated once for human consumption and use, and then retreated and returned to the same ecosystem through wastewater treatment. In essence, it is the same service. Irrefutable benefits occur when the two utilities are combined. Each utility serves essentially the same residential, commercial, and industrial customer. The infrastructure in terms of its piping and appurtenances are usually adjacent or related geographically. Each utility is or should be customer driven. Wastewater volumetric charges are directly linked to domestic water metered consumption. Treatment of raw potable water and wastewater treatment requires similar expertise and similar interaction with the same federal and state regulatory agencies. Economies through the elimination of redundant administrative, engineering, and planning functions result in savings. And this may be a stretch, but I firmly believe that the water system would finally be depoliticized to some degree. Water is a finite resource which gets more expensive to treat and transmit every year. As humans learn more and care more about their nutritional intake, science continues to provide more and better data as to contaminant levels and their long-term impact. Therefore, the cost of treating water continues to escalate. Does it make sense from the viewpoint of the Western North Carolina region as a whole to have multiple water treatment facilities in each community, or is it a waste as I see it? It is the role of the legislature to complete a series of actions which it began 80 years ago by Billy Sullivan. Factually, the Asheville water system evolved as a regional water system throughout Buncombe County via the now extinct old water and sewer districts into other parts of Buncombe County and then finally into Henderson County. In 1990, the legislature again guided the city into a regional solution for the system's long-term water needs by requiring the permission of any adjoining county before a water intake could be constructed in that county. The Asheville-Buncombe-Henderson Regional Water Authority accomplished a great deal of good things during its 25-year history, which came to an unfortunate end in 2005. The demise of the authority prodded the legislature into action with Sullivan 2 and 3, which has led us here tonight. I'd like to remind you, if you don't recall, or educate you, that about 18 or 19 years ago, the Water Authority initiated discussions with the Metropolitan Sewerage District, the city, other owners in the region to evaluate the feasibility of combining the water and wastewater utilities. In fact, they engaged the services of the Institute of Government at Chapel Hill to come facilitate the discussions. At the end of that process, it was widely held that the concept was worthy, but it was unworkable at that time. Well, I think it is time now to relook at that. This combination could be accomplished with the following 2 steps. Establish a new regional, publicly owned water and wastewater authority with employees of both utilities becoming employees of the new authority. Recognize the city's past contributions by paying them into perpetuity 5% of the revenues generated by the water fund. The city would additionally reduce its expenses by not incurring as many costs with the transfer. I would also recommend that the legislation specifically state that there would be a moratorium on any consideration of privatization of the new utility for a period of 10 to 20 years after the combination. That would address the fears. I appreciate this opportunity to express my opinion. I spent the greatest part of my professional career trying to improve water and wastewater services for this region. To compete economically, we must recognize that whatever benefits the entire region also benefits its member counties, municipalities, and most of all, its citizens. A combined public regional water and sewer utility will facilitate such an approach. As the legislature acted with great vision in the 1960s, Steve, to address the wastewater needs, I think the opportunity to once again proactively lead by establishing this combined authority must not be ignored. Nellie, thank you for that opportunity.
Okay, people who have questions want to start coming to the mic. I'm going to introduce a couple of special people. On either side of the microphone are our bouncers. They have also done quite a job of getting this meeting ready tonight, and I want to give them my appreciation. We've got Judith Foy and Janet Schwartz. If you would stand so people will recognize our bouncers. Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to get right to the questions. You may address them to an individual or to the entire panel or to one of the resource people, MSD, water director, or the people who have just spoken. Thank you. And if you would give your name, please.
Hi, I'm Robin Cape, and I'm on the Woodfin Water Board. And this is the first time we heard that we might be included in this process. And I would ask that we would be involved in the conversation if that is even being talked about. We are a small water company who have made great inroads into putting our, I believe small is beautiful, and Woodfin has done a good job of being steward to their water department. We are not a part of the City of Woodfin. We are the Woodfin Water and Sewerage District, independent. And I just think to hear tonight from you all that we might be included in this is, it's not really how I think it should be done. And I request that you come and talk to our board and at least include us in these conversations. I would like to know, is Hendersonville going to include its water in this regional water department? How big is the scope? Is it just the city of Asheville is going to be the regional water department? How many people are being included in this process?
Robin, I don't think I can answer your question just because I don't think there's been any determination as to what the scope might be. There will be, I will drop a note to Chairman Moffitt and let him know if you're interested, if that's where it goes on.
Concern.
Well, I mean, you know what I mean, concern. Just interest in being engaged is what I meant.
Right.
And I would expect Hendersonville will not be engaged in water issues related to the city of Asheville or a joint facility. But that's just my opinion.
So I guess the question comes up for me is, how does it get chosen who gets to engage in the regional water? That becomes is it an invitation or is it just a, so if we want to know how we're invited or drawn in, whatever the
there
dynamics
are 5 members of the committee that are studying the issue. We probably have 5 different sets of opinions. We've only had 1 meeting so far. So you're invited to be involved. I don't think there's any predetermination of what might be included. Everything is sort of on the table except for the privatization issue.
Well, and I can just say I support Asheville having its own water system. I believe that they have been treated differently than all the other water departments around. Woodfin gets to charge differentials. Weaverville gets to charge differentials. So I support Asheville's water.
I would point out that on the 23rd from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m., elected officials are specifically invited to voice their concerns at the public hearing.
My name is Barry Summers, and I'm proud to be one of the rogue elements that Tim Moffitt referred to in the paper of people who don't believe his assurances about privatization. I'll point out that in the paper, Representative Moffitt seems to characterize privatization as necessitating the transfer of ownership of the water system. Now, Mr. Voltaire can probably confirm that's rare in privatization. Most public-private partnerships don't involve a transfer of ownership. The city or regional authority could still own the water, could still pay the revenue bonds, but a private company would take over every aspect of operation, management, maintenance, setting rates, collecting revenue, etc. So my question is, given that, and given the fact that privatization attempts are coming to western North Carolina, Tryon, North Carolina, just south of us, has a very persistent suitor from Texas. They really want to buy Tryon's water system. They're waiving a $4 million check at a small town that has infrastructure needs. They're under pressure to take money from a private company to sell their water system. Can anyone here at the panel guarantee that if a regional authority takes possession of the water system, that a year from now, 2 years from now, not as a direct result of your committee process, but since it's removed from the city of Asheville, can you promise that authority won't later sign a contract with Aqua America, Veolia, Skanska, KBR, Nye-America, Macquarie Group, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the companies that are active in this state wanting to buy water systems?
The only answer I can say to you is this. With the current bonds that are outstanding, it would not be legal, in my opinion, and this is really the lawyer here, but in my opinion, for us to privatize the water system.
But again, are you characterizing privatize the water system as a transfer of ownership? Currently, the city of Asheville has private partners in the water system. They're private partners they're dealing with, I believe, collections, metering, etc. Are you characterizing privatization as solely transfer of ownership? Because that's not necessary.
We're early in the process, Barry. I don't have any, there's been no discussion of anything related to privatization of any sort, other than in response to questions that we've received from the public. But I'm unaware of any discussion of any type of privatization, whether some small part of a broader system or the broader system itself.
I would agree that we haven't heard any legislative discussion about privatization, and what you're asking is a pretty nuanced question. I mean, right now, cities all across this nation contract with private entities for certain kinds of services. Our water department has private engineering companies that develop engineering plans and help construct lines. We've got, as you mentioned, metering and billing. You know, we hire companies to do some of those services. I think when you jump over into transferring an entire system to a private entity, not only is it not being discussed, but the stopgap on that right now is that we have $40 million in bonds outstanding. You would have to get approval.
That's my point, is that that's the characterization of Mr. Moffitt's promise. I will promise to pass a bill barring privatization in perpetuity. Barring privatization in perpetuity does not mean that a future regional authority couldn't contract for a substantial public-private partnership whereby a private company outright operates the system completely independent. The public entity would still own the system, but a private company could do all of the operations.
I think we just can agree that if the legislature wants something to happen, there's probably a way to find out how to make it happen. But at the same time, it's not actively being discussed right now.
Thank you.
Mr. Volsky, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Gentleman was correct in that most of the privatization initiatives are like what Esther said, was that they're outsourcing a lot of the services that are required by the treatment system, but it can go all the way up to where private-public partnership where a company comes in and manages the entire system without buying the assets. So the gentleman is right in that most of the privatization initiatives of utilities don't necessarily involve the transfer of part assets.
As a property owner in both the city of Asheville and in Buncombe County, both pieces of property on the water system itself, I noticed that in your PowerPoint presentation. Let's see, this fiscal year 10-11 monthly equivalent commercial water bills or residential. Doesn't matter. None of them are showing the county. And I'm curious if that was just an oversight.
No, let me tell you about that. All right, what the gentleman is talking about, if you look at the handout that I have provided what it lays out in several of the slides is the residential water rates and then commercial water rates for 25,000 gallons per month and then commercial water rates for 500,000 gallons per month. And his question is, how come it doesn't show a county rate? What's the county rate for payment for water? It's the exact same as the city because under the Sullivan Acts, after the dissolution of the water agreement in 2005 and the passage of Sullivan Acts 2 and 3, the city is not allowed to charge a higher rate to county residents or commercial property owners because it says we can't charge a differential rate. And the theory, to argue the other side, the theory is that investment was made by those county residents into the water system, and so we shouldn't be allowed to charge a differential rate. However, you'll notice on this handout is most places do charge a differential water rate, and they use the outside rate, the rate outside the city, to subsidize the inside rate. So that's one reason why our residential rates aren't as low as some other places, because we are not able to charge a higher rate outside the city to subsidize our inside rate.
Okay. The other little rumor I hear going around is has it been legally determined who owns the water system?
You ask like these little questions that have really big issues. When we were at the study committee on January 23rd down at the legislature, Attorney Bob Long presented a history of the water system, and basically his presentation went to the issue of who owns the water system. He represented the county during some of the litigation, so he's pretty knowledgeable about that issue. He made the argument, and Jan Davis alluded to it, that the ratepayers own the system. The ratepayers pay for it and they own the system. Now, why would somebody make that argument? It seems pretty obvious. Most utility systems throughout the state are paid for in the same way. He's trying to make that argument because if the water system is taken from Asheville and transferred to an independent authority or merged with MSD, I believe he's trying to make the argument that the city of Asheville shouldn't be compensated for it because they don't really own it, because the ratepayers paid for it. And that's why you heard Mayor Russ Martin say, look, I pay my Progress Energy bill every month, right? I'm paying an electric utility payment every month. Do I own the lines? Do I own the poles? Do I own the power plant? No. So, the position of the city, I think I can uniformly state, is that we do own the system, and the argument that because ratepayers paid for it means that we don't own it, it is not a viable argument. Just to add to that, water is considered, from a legal standpoint, a proprietary interest. So if you take it, it's like a taking, and you have to compensate for it. And that's why that argument is being made, and how that plays out.
Well,
Hopefully it won't have to play out.
Has it been legally determined, I guess, would be the best way.
I mean, there's teams of lawyers that could pay a ton of money to go litigate that issue. We'll see.
Thank you.
Hopefully we won't.
I'm Audie Myers, and I live in Asheville. I have two questions. One, how many water lines still need to be replaced in the city water system? And two, what is the role of the issue of annexation of water in relation to the issue of annexation, pro and con, and what are the ways to keep a city from being boxed in and being able to assure its future and get income from the people it serves, which is much outside of Asheville.
I didn't plan people with these questions. Our water director, Steve Shook, is sitting right there. Steve, I don't want to put you on the spot, but can you speak to the issue of further improvements that are identified and hopefully going to happen?
Sure. We have a capital improvement
improvements program. And so we have a capital improvements program, and so on a 5-year basis, we program out these improvements. The question of replacing water lines is that they all need to be replaced at some point. So we have an ongoing kind of rolling program, and we identify the oldest and the ones that are in the worst condition and replace those first, and we continue on. And as time progresses, then we get to lines that at one time were new, but now are old and need to be replaced. So it's an ongoing process.
So since 2005, we did a big push with $40 million in bonds, and now we're kind of on a system of repair, replace. I want to speak to your annexation question. That is another issue that's very unique to Asheville, just like the differential water rate restriction. The Sullivan Acts also put us in a different position than other municipalities in the state with regard to water. So if you're in another municipality in the state, the general statutes allow a city to say to, let's say a developer is building a subdivision adjacent to the city and they want water. Subdivision developer wants water. The city would be allowed to say to that developer, fine, you can have water, but you have to agree to annex into the city. It's called a voluntary annexation. It's a voluntary annexation agreement. You want the service, you got to come into the city. And it happens on the front end of the development, before people even buy homes in that development. What the city of Asheville situation is that they cannot make that a requirement. So let me give you an example, Biltmore Lake. Biltmore Lake was built on the edge of the city, and it received city water, but the city wasn't allowed to require Biltmore Lake to come into the city. Instead, it had to wait till it's completely built out so that it met an urban requirement, which is required under involuntary annexation, and then attempt to involuntarily annex it, which is very unpopular. If you're a resident in one of these subdivisions, you're thinking, why do I need to come to the city? I've already got all this stuff. What are they going to do for me? And that's a good question. But if we were like other cities, we would be permitted to require that annexation up front in exchange for the receipt of the services.
And I just note that I think Esther has fairly stated what the situation is. In Henderson County, we do have variable rates, and so we don't have the issue that you see here. Again, a lot of this, as you can tell, is history. With respect to the improvements made by the city, I served on the authority board just prior to its termination, and as Dan Davis and others have stated, we were at the point where sufficient monies were not being put into the system to keep it being improved. And one of the things at the first meeting that I found really impressive was that there were substantial monies put into the system after the termination of the water authority. So in fact, the city of Asheville did what it said it was going to do in terminating the agreement, and that's from somebody in Henderson County. I would state, though, that another surprising piece, and this may just be a matter of geography, but the fact is that the city of Asheville's water system loses over 30% of its water. And that strikes the average person as sort of a really big number, that 1/3 of the water that goes into your system is lost somewhere in the system before it comes out somebody's pipe. Now, maybe it's not true. Maybe it's not a big number. I don't know that yet. It's a function of ours being up and down, and there are a lot of pressure in those water pipes that make it very different than if you're laying water line in someplace really flat in the state. So the efficiency of the water system is something that the committee, I think, is going to continue to look at and determine whether there are better ways or there needs to be more things done to make the system more efficient, not just financially.
Do the water lines lose, do the replaced water lines lose water, or just the old ones?
We might want Steve to speak to this. We do have a unique geographical situation where our water lines go up and down and it creates a pretty high water pressure, but Steve can address that.
Yes, our system does lose 30 to 35% of our water. Some of it's in inaccurate metering, and we have programs in place to test meters. We're replacing all of our small meters now. So we're addressing that piece of the puzzle. Also, there is a question of high pressures, as Mr. McGrady alluded to. Some of our pressures reach as high as 400 psi, which is extremely high. I came from a system in Piedmont, North Carolina, where if the pressure got over 100 psi, we thought that was high pressure. The average pressure here is 150 to 200 psi, so it's a high pressure system, and that does create leaks. One of the strategies in the AWWA operations manuals is that you reduce pressure to reduce your leakage. Even our new pipes are tested for pressure retention, and they pass that test before we'll sign off on them. But within a few years, even our new pipes develop leaks just because of the high pressures. It is a continuing problem. We have leak detection programs in place. We've purchased new equipment. I don't think there's any engineering that we're not doing that would make it more efficient. I think we're doing the best we can. We have an engineering study that shows that we're in the top 10% of systems in the world that, in terms of water loss, for our pressures, for our topography, we are one of the highest ranked systems in the world in terms of our efficiencies and retention of water. It's a fact of our geography, as was mentioned earlier. It's a fact of these high pressures, and it's just an issue that we have to live with. Am I satisfied with it? No. I'm from the old school that says, gosh, that's a high number. That's a big number. We need to do something about it. And we're doing something. We bought leak detection equipment. We have replaced lines. We respond to all of our leaks within 30 minutes. We assess them and put them on a priority list to repair them. We're being very proactive in that regard. So it's something that we recognize as an issue. We are attempting to do it. One of the things that you have to look at is the cost-benefit of repairing all leaks versus the cost of the water that you're producing. And you know, that cost-benefit for some small leaks is just not there. And so you have to kind of prioritize what you're going to do. So I don't want anyone to go away thinking that we're just kind of whistling in the graveyard or something about these leaks. We're taking them very seriously and trying our best, using our best engineering practices to address those.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Valerie Ho, and I have a question for actually Representative Tim Moffitt, but since he's not here today, tonight, I would like to ask Mr. McGrady this question. Except for Representative Tim Moffitt, why is there no one else on the study committee representing Asheville and Buncombe? Why do we have representatives from all over North Carolina be on a study committee that will decide what would happen to Asheville's water? Can you answer me that? Thank you.
Completely. The committee was appointed out of a committee that Representative Moffitt sits on. He was the person that came up with the idea for the committee, and when he reached out, he had to recruit people to be on the committee. There are 4 Republicans and 1 Democrat. 2 of the other members are from very large metropolitan areas, and I assume, without knowing, that the thought that somebody from Wake and somebody from Mecklenburg, 2 large systems of similar nature, perhaps similar nature, I shouldn't assume anything, would be relevant to the discussion. As I indicated, I actually was rather aggressive in wanting to make sure I was on this committee. But I suggest you drop Representative Moffitt a call, note, and or come up to the hearing on Thursday in 10 days, and you can ask that question directly.
Thank you. My name is Rich Bosch. You can tell from my accent, I'm not a native North Carolinian. I come from New York.
and moved to Asheville 5.5 months ago. As a New Yorker, to put my question into context, I'd like to quote from Senator Moynihan, who famously said on the floor of the United States Senate, "Sir, you're entitled to your own opinion. You're not entitled to your own facts." For me to formulate an informed and fact-based opinion, rather than a political opinion, I need two things. The first I need is to understand more clearly the benefits of merging with MSD or an independent entity. And by that I mean, what are the economies of scale? If so, what cost reductions or other benefits can be expected? What are the benefits in fairness and management? What are the benefits to regional growth? The second question would be, what is the proposed fair compensation to Asheville for the investments which have been funded by the city residents? And if we had those kinds of facts, and if the study commission could put that kind of information to us, then perhaps we could have an informed decision.
I was going to get that. Except that there was not exactly a question there, so I'm going to ask one. Representative McGrady, can you outline how the study committee's process will work from here forward so that maybe people get an idea of whether or not you're looking at those very things?
First meeting was simply a fact-finding effort. Heard from MSD, heard from the city, and heard from the county's lawyer in the past, just to understand some of the history and some of the issues. Second meeting is coming here to hear from the public. And it's, again, I've got the notices of the hearing, but it runs from 9 to 5. So the object here is to hear from anybody, whatever their opinions might be, on water and sewer. And I think the gentleman has correctly noted where the committee is going to have to answer those sorts of questions before it gets to making any recommendation. But I'm not prepared, I don't know the answers to those questions yet. I'm expecting the third meeting, and I'm really expecting a third and fourth meeting will be back in Raleigh. There are some other players, not just Woodfin, but other players that have not been heard from yet. And I'm expecting that will be the third meeting, will be to get that factual background. And then after that, the committee will set to the task based on the facts as it understands it. It could have one of several results, including taking absolutely no action and putting this off, having had a good discussion, but realizing it's going to take a lot more or a lot longer to get to a recommendation that a majority of the committee can support.
Thank you. Okay.
Good evening, folks. My name is Tim, and I am deeply troubled by the activist approach that Moffitt, Representative Moffitt, and his cronies are taking. And this is not exclusive to the water issue. This reeks of partisan politics. And my question is, if it's broke, don't fix it. No, that wasn't my question. Now, my question is, if it's broke, don't fix it. So why can't interested entities join Asheville Water as a solution. And I just encourage folks to tell Moffitt to stop it. And, my question is, is this the precedent of usurping the city's utility similar to what's happened in Michigan, where could they make a decision, the state, this activist legislature make a decision that, oh, Asheville City Council, we don't really need them like they've done in Michigan, and is this the first step in that sort of direction where they just abolish our city government?
The answer to your first question is yes. And the answer to your second question is I don't think so. But in this state, the power is rested in the General Assembly. And the General Assembly can abolish all 100 counties if it wants to. It can abolish or recombine or refigure all municipalities, because municipalities and counties are units of state government. So the question is, do they have the power? Yes. Is this a step in that direction? I don't believe it.
Well, Representative Moffitt is a radical right-wing activist person. Oh, I'm sorry. It all blurs together.
Questions? Questions? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dwight Butner. I am a citizen of the city of Asheville, the county of Buncombe, in the state of North Carolina. And I want to extend my gratitude and thanks for all of my representatives for being here this evening. I have to admit that as a citizen of Asheville, that at times during this whole discussion, I felt like the sheep in a discussion with two wolves on what's for dinner. But my fundamental question here is forward-reaching. I think that in many ways there are some uncomfortable facts in my mind, and I'd like to state them, and then I'd like to ask how we move forward. It's clear in my mind that that both Henderson County and Buncombe County have invested in our water system. And Representative McGrady, I appreciate you being here this evening, being from the Lion's Den as the only representative on the panel and the only person in here. And we really appreciate you being here. And as a citizen, I apologize to you for any problems that we've caused you in the past. As I've looked at the history of this, the thing that seems to the most glaring, the most glaring fact that I see is that Asheville invested in the infrastructure that captured and produces the water. My observation is that these pipes would not be worth a damn without the water in them. So as a citizen, I would like to know why I'm not able to sell my water like everybody else in the state, to pay my bills and keep my taxes low.
If I understand the question, then sort of Esther goes to the Sullivan Acts again. There are no Sullivan Acts in any other part of the state, and it is what it is. Your legislators, long before I got to the General Assembly, passed the Sullivan Acts, 3 of them actually, over a period of time. And so you're just in a different situation, reflecting of some of the history that we've heard about, and the political judgments that were made by that group of elected officials at that point in time.
May I have a follow-up question? That being the case, everything that I've heard this evening indicates to me that between the responsibility of both the city and the county, that all of the debts that we incurred during the 30s are now paid. That since the cancellation of the water agreement, that the city of Asheville has taken it upon themselves to improve the water system so it is up to standards, which was the fundamental thrust of Sullivan Act 3. So my question to you becomes, as a General Assembly, why would we continue forward under these acts if the original reason for them, which was to pay off the bonds, is now expired, and the investment has been made by the city of Asheville in, that honors the improvements to the system, which was the purpose of Sullivan Act 3.
And all of the things that it seeks to format. And I'm wondering, and again, you may not have the answer to this now, and if you don't, I'd be curious to know if you could possibly answer this question on the 23rd when there's the meeting on this issue. How will the committee judge and measure all the data, all the discovery process that has taken place? And in answer to each of those bullets, how will it weigh in a systematic, scientific fashion, if you will, and come to a conclusion on each one of those bullet items? And will that be in a documented form on how that'll happen?
I don't know whether it'll be in a documented form, but all I can say to you is my pledge is to do it in a transparent manner, and hopefully to have a dialogue first among that group of legislators and the affected communities, and then among ourselves about what additional facts might we need. Where do these facts lead us? Do there need to be changes? And if so, what changes might be recommended? But it's too early in the process right now for me to.
Is that something you would advocate doing on behalf of the committee, or asking them to do that?
I come from the Sierra Club, a very broadly open and transparent organization, and that's my way of operating. I can't speak for my 4 other colleagues, but again, I'm not aware of, and I would be aware of, if there were a whole range of sidebar conversations or preconceived notions here. I don't have one. You can understand what my preconceived notion is with respect to Hendersonville and Henderson County, but it's pretty clearly stated. And I would urge you and urge everyone to give the process a little bit of a chance. I don't have any problem with this level of skepticism that people have. In fact, I would expect it. But it is a process, and we're going to have at least 2 or 3 more meetings before you're going to be seeing any recommendations. That's my belief.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Terry Bellamy, I just have asked one point of order. Is it okay? I don't have a question, but I do want to make a couple of requests.
Very briefly.
A couple of things. Tonight, a lot of information was given regarding the history of the system. I do want to say that the recurring theme that happened was stated was in the past, the leadership of addressing issues came from local government coming together, not the state government telling us what to do. And I think if we're going to follow in the lines of the past, then we need to make sure that this is a local issue and that local people address this issue, not the state. This process, I think, is missing a few steps in that if you look at the original bill, first it said to hand over the system. So I want to applaud everyone who was here for your involvement because you helped change the process. And I do have copies of the original bill that stated that the system would be handed over from the city of Asheville to the sewage system without any public input. So thank you all for helping the council to push to change that process. But with this process, this looks like it's just a takings for the city of Asheville because Black Mountain, Woodford, Weaverville, Montreat are not at the table, were not included, are not even talked about in the legislation. So if Asheville is not to feel like this is a singling out, why is it that no one else is included? It appears to me that it does appear to be all about the city of Asheville's water system. Another thing, it was referred to tonight to compare us to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg system, and that's not fair. City of Asheville took a trip down to Charlotte and sat with former city manager of Asheville, Doug Bean, to actually hear about the system and how it works. In Charlotte, they actually have the spheres of influences to talk about how they're going to grow. And yes, they have a consolidated system, but it came as a result of understanding how far and how big each municipality was going to grow. And the locals, it didn't come from Raleigh. So don't compare us, because it's not apples to apples, it's apples to grapefruits, it's not the same.
It is true, the best solutions, I think, will come when the local folks can all get together and agree, but in fact, there are 3 settlement acts, and on 3 separate occasions, the General Assembly has stepped in. It sounds like at least 2 of those were not times when the locals were able to get together. It was, in fact, imposed from above. The original bill has been referred to in a lot of the press, and I'm aware of the original bill. I think Representative Moffitt has spoken to this. I would say to you that freshman members of the legislators don't always pay a lot of attention to when bills need to get filed, and Representative Moffitt was working on a range of different things of various natures, and suddenly found himself with a bill filing deadline, and he dropped some bills that were not ready for prime time, but in an effort to hold a place. And I know that to be true because the Airport Authority bill, as originally introduced, even though I signed on it, was not a bill I would have ever introduced or supported. And finally, I think, Terry, you make a really good point that I don't want to have lost. And this was the subject of some discussion at the last meeting. I think the biggest problem with any sort of independent authority is continuing to have the linkage between decisions being made about infrastructure, whether it's water, sewer, as you and I know well, transportation, and the growth that occurs. And in Henderson County, we've got a situation where Hendersonville cannot extend water anywhere in the county unless it has the permission of the county to do that. Likewise, the city of Asheville doesn't extend water in any part of Henderson County without getting Henderson County's permission. And so that linkage is really critically important. And I know one of my colleagues expressed sort of the opposite view of the one that I have, and I think you do, that whatever we end up with, we cannot afford to end up with an entity that doesn't clearly link into whatever the land use plans are for the city, the other cities, and the county. Because if that breaks up, we will really have a mess when we come back and have a lot more development. So I think that's really well stated.
Well, just a couple more points to your point. I think it's important to point out that this issue still does not involve anybody but the city of Asheville. If we are looking at Henderson County, then we have to also look at Hendersonville. And just to go back, a few years ago, the city of Asheville accepted that we lost with the Sullivan Acts and began to point our investments and our focus on improving the system, which is why we originally broke away from the water agreement. And so it begs the question is, do you want the system fixed in an efficient and effective manner? And if so, show us how we have not done that as a municipality, because we've hired the best staff and made the best investments in our system in order to do just what we broke away from the agreement to do. And a couple more things very quickly.
That is fair. That's a fair question.
And very quickly, just when Hendersonville was looking at improving their system, the city of Asheville reached out its hand to develop a relationship with Hendersonville, which historically there have been a break in communication, inability to work together, and we did so in selling in the upwards of 2 million gallons a day during the necessary time period for them to improve their system. So we are able to operate in an effective and efficient manner, in a collaborative manner when necessary. I'll say this to everyone else. Please continue to fight in this discussion. Tomorrow, the City Council will be addressing this issue. And I want to say thank you to our Vice Mayor and to Councilman Jan Davis for leading this effort on behalf of the City of Asheville. And lastly, just for the record, I'm in support of the City of Asheville keeping its water system. Thank you.
We are a little over our 9 o'clock closing time. With your kind permission, we have 3 people in line, and I would like to hear their questions, if that's okay. If you need to leave, slip out, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Asher Wilson. Vice Mayor, I'm sorry that Mr. Young and I didn't alert you to our presence. We've heard from Henderson, and Asheville, and another municipality, was it Woodfin? That doesn't seem overly interested in this. Have you asked or consulted any of the other water services around, or has anybody heard their opinions as you've interacted with them?
Not yet. The first day was spent with Asheville and MSD, the second for public comment. The third will bring in whatever set of groups turn out to be suggestions or show any interest or show a concern, probably at the third meeting that will occur. We're still early in the process.
And I would note at the public hearing on the 23rd, Representative Moffitt has allotted public comment time specifically to the citizens of Asheville between 10 and 12. And then he has allotted time to Buncombe County residents between 1 and 3, and Henderson County residents, I think, from 3 to 4. So those are the major groups identified by Representative Moffitt, and allotted time slots in there.
But in your interactions at the government level, you haven't heard anything from them, or nobody said anything?
Well, they're not specifically identified in the study.
But I mean, how can you have a regional water?
Well, your questions are somewhat rhetorical, and I hate for Representative McGrady to have to field all of them, because Representative Moffitt is the architect of the study bill, and as chair of a study committee, he of course can set the agenda and steer the direction.
I wasn't trying to make rhetorical comments. I was just asking if you heard anything from anybody else.
Point of information, Esther, I do remind people that if you're a resident of Moffitt, you're a resident of Buncombe County, and you can speak during that time frame.
I think that's a good point. Just look at your tax bill.
Yes.
Yes.
My name is Heather Rayburn, and I had a question. Well, didn't his meeting also have a chunk of time for businesses? And
yes,
then,
4 to 5 p.m.
So you can be a business of Buncombe and Asheville to go to that. My question is for Mr. McGrady. Is it too late for Tim Moffitt to appoint Patsy Keever and Susan Fisher onto the committee since it's so early?
It's never too late.
Well, how can we do it?
Speaker, I believe in this case, I believe these are speaker appointments, and then the committee out of the Legislative Review Commission appointments, but are sometimes additional members added to committees? Yes. Is it likely? We're going to be 2 meetings into a total of 4 at the point in time that anything like that could potentially occur, so I don't expect it will happen.
Well, I think they could get caught up really easy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Sorry. My name is Lenny Sinning, and I first want to thank Mayor Bellamy for her comments and want to concur with all of them. I know we've been told not to be paranoid about this issue, but if it looks like a duck, I have a tendency to think it is a duck. And when you look at the history that has been so brilliantly spelled out tonight, when the city complained about Sullivan 1, we were rewarded with Sullivan 2 and 3. We've talked about the fact that we are burdened with Sullivan's 1, 2, and 3. What we need to talk about in addition to that is why. Why is the city of Asheville and its taxpayers and property owners the only people in the state to be singled out with this kind of dictation and with this burden that keeps us from fair rates? And we're going back to the days of Hazel Phobes and Rick Moss and Mr. DeBrule and all of those folks. Why we can't require annexation as part of it for dense areas that meet the annexation qualifications, and why we're told that we can't spend the water revenues the way we want to. So the question is, why are we burdened with those acts, especially from a representative of our area who is categorically against involuntary annexation, but doesn't seem to have a problem with wanting to take a municipality's airport and water system away?
I think is probably the only one in this room that was in the General Assembly at the time that the Sullivan Acts were put in place. So I'm not going to speak to that. I will say, though, that, and this may be a little bit strong, but the reason why, from my perspective, those acts are in place is because of precisely what Henderson County got out of the deal originally. We thought we had contracted with the city of Asheville to provide water to the north end of Henderson County. And when we requested that water, we didn't get any. The city, on a number of occasions, has not followed through on commitments that have been made over the years. And the city just does not have a very strong reputation in terms of working with many of its adjoining neighbors. Now that is a history from my perspective in the past. My experience of late has been the opposite. I worked on the MPO with Brownie Newman and others. We worked cooperatively with the city on a range of transportation projects. More recently, in the Asheville Airport, the city and the county opened up a slot on the Asheville Airport Authority. Again, a recent indication of local officials beginning to work together. And I can give you a myriad of other more recent examples. But there is, the thing that I keep coming back to is there is history. The General Assembly, I'm sure, in its wisdom before I got there, had pretty good reason that gave rise to the Sullivan Acts. And that wasn't a Republican initiative. It was an initiative put forward by a range of legislators who represented Buncombe and the city of Asheville at the time.
This book is, he's putting out in the public, and so we just want to make sure it's correct. And I just want to make sure that people understand that the information that he's provided is during the Water Authority, and the water lines were the issue, and that the Water Authority staff and the staff of Henderson County could not come together on the line sizes. It wasn't the issue of not giving the water, it was the issue of what line was the appropriate line to go in, based upon engineering. It's not correct. And since I've been there, we have done more collaborations with governments than any other time.
I think that we will accept that there is much better cooperation now. As a person who sat through the Water Authority hearings, I'm going to say we're going to leave that.
It's the history
issue. It's just not fair to
Yeah.
leave it out of it.
It's not quite that simple, so we're gonna not try to solve that right now. I would like to hear, we're over time, and I would like to hear from the senator, please.
Yay.
Because the question had to do with the Sullivan Acts, and he's the one who knows.
Well, and I didn't want to sit through this entire meeting and not at least make a comment. I think I've earned that by sitting through it. And Chuck's taking a pretty good beating up there, and I know him to be a man of integrity and good spirit, and I wanted to tell you that. I think he will be a friend to us before this is over. I know if I were sitting where he is and Henderson County was begging for their life, he would want me to help him, and I certainly would. Let me give you a little bit of history. I think Steve gave you a great history on the history of this county and all, but the Sullivan Act did have a provision about water, and it put together about 6 or 7 systems throughout this county, one of which was the city, the rest of which were county systems, and said that there would not be differential rates in this county. That's what it said. Now, we have proceeded to fight over it every 10 years since. That was 1930. Right. And we fight over it every 10 years. We've had 2 or 3 lawsuits. There was one, I was trying to remember the fellow's name. It wasn't a Gudger, but it was the county manager at the time, Coke Candler. Pretty famous case. It was decided the same way. They've all been decided the same way. And what we were faced with in 2005 was a situation where we had a water agreement. It had worked well, except for the fact of the city and county taking money out of the system. That was a bad part of it, and I think everybody agrees with that, and the system was in a tremendous state of disrepair. But the city chose to withdraw from that, and stated, members of city council stated to the public that they intended to do differential rates and increase rates in the county. We had a 75-year history of not doing that. Now, I'm a city resident. I work in the city. I live in the city. I've defended the city's right to do annexation the whole time I've been in the General Assembly. Do you know what abuse I take for that? And 2/3 of my district's county, but I've done it. But in this situation, we reached the conclusion that we need to quit fighting over water. And people were threatened by it. And when you tell people, I know you've been getting your water for what you've been getting, I'm going to double your bill. How many people in here would like to hear that? Well, neither did the people in the county. And we decided to bring peace in the valley. Water is not something we should be fighting over. It's something that's absolutely necessary to economic development, to our lives, to our future. And we said, stop it. Stop the fighting. No differential rates. If people need water, you're going to give it to them. And we'll find something else we can fight over. That's what we did. We preserved the history of this county. And there's about a 65-page Court of Appeals decision that outlines all this history that we've argued over for 75 years. They wrote it all down and decided this is the history. So if you want to read it, go get that Court of Appeals decision and you'll see it. That's what we did. And I think we did the right thing. To my friends in the city, and Chuck has said this 2 or 3 times, and I think we need to listen to it. We've got to be careful how we play with our neighbors. And that includes our neighbors in the county. People don't want to live in fear of their next door neighbor. They don't want to live with intimidation, with the thought that someone they don't vote for is going to do things to them. And we've got to quit doing that. That's what we thought we were doing when we passed those bills. Now with this, I want to pass just a little on this. I cannot let the night go by without saying that I finally have found something that Dr. Mumpower said that I agree with. And about a week ago, he wrote an op-ed piece in the paper. And I'm not saying this about you, Chuck, it's what he said about you. He said that to say this is studying the issue is a bit disingenuous. It's more like somebody casing the bank trying to figure out how to rob it without getting caught. And those of us that represent 2/3, and in my case 4/5 of this county, we have not been included in this. We do not agree with this. And if we're ever going to have regional cooperation, it will come because people of goodwill sit down together and do it. It won't come because somebody, because they had the political power to do it, went in and stole it. I'll promise you, the ones that come behind you will steal it back, and they might get yours while they're at it. That's what happens when you start this kind of stuff, and it needs to stop. Thank you.
I can listen to